want to miss you. So, all right. Welcome everybody to a kind of a first of its kind budget discussion. Usually, this is something that as a town we have an annual process and we go through, and it's very routine and all that. But this year, I think in somewhat in light of the conversations and the budget committee getting involved and select board taking a stronger stance and ownership of a budget process, we wanted to somewhat start a step backwards before everyone gets that binder that's, probably you should be lifting with your legs with. It's a much more, obviously once you're in it, you're into that. But we want to talk about some of the higher points of what this process is. How do we get to a point where a tax bill ends up in someone's mailbox? And start from there and then drill down really all the way down to process. What are the parts of the budget? How do we end up at the end of the day go there? So just on the screen here, where do my taxes go? So you make a payment. We have 2 payments a year. Where do those taxes go? What are the places that those funds are going to? What are they funding? How does that process work? So we'll go through that. We're going to go through the budget document sections and the information that you can find within the budget document. As I mentioned, it's a very dense document. There's a lot of information in there, both historical information, current year information. Where a number of different pieces of town funds are situated, but also a broader sense of CPI and costs over a longer term. We're going to go through the general budget schedule and the purpose of those meetings. Again, we have 9 budget committee members, 5 select board members. You have a town manager, you have a finance director, and then you have the department heads or perhaps a committee chair who will be part of each one of several of those meetings. How do we get the most out of that process? And there's been a lot of different ways to do that, but obviously there's always ways you can improve. So that's one section. And the last part, we're going to talk about the stakeholders. What do each individual group that's part of this process, what do they do? What's their roles? What are their responsibilities? And then hopefully we have a great budget that comes out of it. So let's start out with the very, basic. We sort of termed this Budget 101, but we want to talk about how do we get here. So the first thing we talk about, how is the tax bill determined, right? Where does it come from? Now, this information is on each tax bill, but there's a lot of information on each tax bill, and there's a lot of individuals who pay via escrow. They may not even open their tax bill. So there's a lot of people out there who might gloss over or not even necessarily put those pieces together and say, okay, I'm writing this check to the town of Rockport, but what does that mean? So there's 3 main components. There's a municipal appropriation, there's a school appropriation, and a county appropriation. So though the town of Rockport is the one collecting those and assessing those taxes, it's actually assessing those taxes on behalf of 3 entities in total. One is the town, but also the school and the county. So when you add those 3 appropriations together, that's the total amount that is part of our tax commitment, okay? So what we're doing is we take the town's total taxable value. So that's all the valuation of all the property that's in the town of Rockport, both personal property and real estate property. You take all of that amount together, you divide by the amount that you've committed in terms of what you have to pay for those 3 types of appropriations, municipal, school, and county, and that's how you come up with your mill rate. So it's a math problem, and it's a problem, but it's a math problem. So there's obviously, we'll talk a little bit here in a second about how that valuation piece is, but much of the budget process is not talking about valuation, right? It's really only talking about budget and how did these budgets come to be. But to understand the second part of that, which is the valuation, we have to talk about it, because obviously without a valuation, you don't have a mill rate. So how do we do that? How do we come up with a valuation? And this is a very, surface level conversation. but we just had a revaluation in the town of Rockport. So that process involved going into inspecting individual properties and taking sales and putting that information together. And through that data, we assigned values for land, buildings, and accessory structures. So those three components, in terms of your property value, are put together, and that's your whole property. So while that's one part of it, and obviously there's a lot of, I don't want to say hysteria, but a lot of concern about increases of property value increases, and no doubt those do impact all of us. The impacts of how that impacts a tax rate can vary. There's an old rule of thumb that says a third go up, a third go down, and a third stay the same in terms of their property values and their tax implications of that. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not. But the most important piece is you need to understand how that value comes together, because that property valuation that all of us as property owners have in Rockport, that's our proportion of what we pay for the entire pie. That is the tax commitment. So this pie chart is probably one of the most important, because it really talks about how does that tax bill come to be. So of the tax bill, 60% at present goes towards the school, 33% is the municipality, and 7% is the county. So again, we talk about how the town is collecting 100% of the tax bill. All of that, all of us as taxpayers write that check to the town of Rockport. But once we receive it as the town, we are then handing out 67% of it, more than 2/3, to other entities. So we're the entity that's really collecting, but we're really distributing, obviously, the vast majority of it. So what does that mean? So what does a Rockport tax bill look like? Well, the median property value at the town of Rockport right now is $478,000. Now, for some, that might be a shock. That's a very high number. For those of us who are from here and have seen this number steadily rise, when I was, as a member of the select board 20 years ago, when we were going through a revaluation here, that number was on the other side of 300,000. So we've seen dramatic increases in value. I think that's not a surprise to any of us. We've seen the for sale signs out in front of people's homes. We've seen those for sale signs gone before we even notice. COVID has had a big impact on property values. But again, it's not the only component that's driving where our tax bills come from. So the median tax bill of $478,000, that equates to a median tax bill of $6,524.70. So using those same proportions we talked about earlier, and those three components, school being 60% of it, that's $3,914.82 out of that $6,500 or so. The municipality receives $2,153.15, and the county receives $456.73. So again, it's important to recognize here, everyone's writing that check to the town of Rockport of that total number, but the proportions are very important in understanding how does this all come to be, what are we funding when we write that check. So let's talk about the school appropriation. The school appropriation is again 60% of the bill. Their process, and we're going to go through both the school and the county level, because it's important to understand there's distinctions in how those two entities operate and how the town operates. But obviously, with 2/3 of your tax bill decided by those two entities, it's important that everyone understands all aspects of the tax bill. And so just want to quickly lay that out here. It's a different entity, but we want to make sure you understand. So in short, the school appropriation, the budget is proposed by the superintendent in the same sort of manner that the town manager and the municipality is proposing a budget. The school board reviews this proposed budget within their finance committee. Uh, and that's usually under the winter months between January and March. And then the school board will approve their budget. And largely, and it's not on here, but largely their monies are dependent upon what state funding will come through. Obviously, we have less than some other communities because as a low receiver of state funding, that has less of an impact, but certainly it has an impact in Rockport. Then, once the school board has completed their review and finalized their budget, they proceed to place that budget on a public budget meeting. They create a public budget meeting that's usually occurs in the second week or so in May. And that's a format that's very similar to the old town meeting, open town meeting format that most communities, or many communities still use. That's an opportunity where voters can make changes to the budget on the floor. There is, motions and seconds, and you move through that process. They go through a rigid format for their budget that's been set and established by state law. But that is an opportunity where residents can voice their concerns, ask questions, and so forth. Now, there are earlier sections in the school board process to be involved, but that is probably the most public and the most obvious. Once that meeting finalizes, or completes in May, effectively the budget is set, and then that entire budget is then moved forward to a ballot. And then as voters, the members of the community, so in Rockport, we vote on the CSD and the MSAD, those two budgets, we vote to validate the actions taken at that May meeting. So that process obviously is, there hasn't been yet a situation where the town of Rockport has turned down either of those budget validation votes, but they have in other communities. So what does that mean? So those two budgets, MSAD budget is the K-8 budget. So that's the elementary school, the middle school, and the administration and teaching facilities and so forth. The CSD is 9 through 12. It covers the Cameron Hills Regional High School. It's a very different dynamic. The CSD, we're one of 5 communities that are part of the CSD. That was created when this new high school, when the high school was built, not new now, but in 2000. The SAD is an older organization, but it just consists of Camden and Rockport. There are 2 different boards that operate those 2 groups, but there's overlap in all the membership, so effectively it's the same people. And their assessment is based upon a specific complicated school funding formula. Again, that's something that comes through, and there's a period of time when the Department of Education says, okay, here's what we have. We've crunched the numbers. This is what your number is for the year. We did receive good news in that the town of Rockport was this year, for the first time in forever that I am aware of, not considered a minimum receiver community. We actually received additional funding, but that's unfortunately that's been not the norm in past years. So that's 60%. Now let's talk about 7%. So this is the county assessment. You have a budget that's developed by the county administrator and their staff. That budget then goes before the county commissioners. There are 3 county commissioners for the entire county. We have Mark Ratner currently is our county commissioner who represents an area from Camden and Rockport, I think the islands, Owl's Head, it's all over the place. But we have 3 people for the entire county, and Mark gets the pleasure of serving and representing Rockport. In addition, there's a county budget committee. The county budget committee has a very different statutory role. Certainly, we're still looking for an individual to serve in that capacity on behalf of Rockport. But the county budget committee has a great amount of influence in the county budget process, and certainly can answer more about that effort. They operate on a calendar year at the county level, so it's a January to December budget year as opposed to what we have in Rockport and on the school side, where we operate from a July to June calendar. So it's a little different in terms of how their funding works. Their county assessment, there's two different aspects of what we fund county operations. The county assessment is sort of the general county operations. So that's the sheriff's office, court operations, the airport, administration, the clerks, the probate office, all the different aspects of the DA's office and so forth. That amount is based upon municipal valuation, our state valuation. We just received our state valuation for this year, so that will go into the calculation of our county tax for the coming year. And then we have 911 dispatch operations, which is a separate assessment. This was an entity that Rockport and a number of communities somewhat led on about 25 years ago or so to organize dispatch operations regionally. It's not part of the county. It's part of the county. County operates the center, but it's not a part of that county tax. It's a separate payment, and that amount is based upon municipal population. So we get these assessments before the budget, and then these are plugged in. The schools sometimes we don't have. We're sort of taking estimates early on in our municipal budget process so that we can understand where all three of these entities will come into play. But largely, the school and the county are very distinct processes that really have their own momentum to them. And so we're somewhat waiting and receiving those numbers and working with wherever they've landed.
A quick question, if the county budget is January 1 to December 31, and we get our tax bill in December, is that for the last half of that current calendar year, and then, because it straddles.
Right.
It does. So your tax payment that's being made now pay this January to December of 2025. So they lag us by 6 months. Mm-hmm.
And so the question, I'm not sure if they picked up Denise on the on the mics, but in short, basically the timing of their budget process and their calendar year being off from ours, it does create an issue. Now county level has looked a number of times over the years to try to line up with our process. The challenge is that to do so, they have to take usually such incredible tax anticipation notes that it's very difficult for them to all be on cycle with us. But it's been looked at, and I think it will continue to be because it is difficult for them to operate off cycle of sorts. So I'm going to hand over to Megan and let her take it from what is in the municipal budget.
So we just wanted to break down the municipal budget in terms of its major operational sections. So in terms of appropriations, our first row are personnel, wages, and benefits. In general, most municipalities see that 70 to 80% of their operational budget is dedicated to personnel, wages, and benefits. In Rockport specifically, 51% of our total expenditures or 77% of our net operating budget is allocated towards wages and benefits. This is largely driven because we're a service-based operation instead of a production-based operation. Then our next biggest section is purchase and contractual services. This covers operations where there aren't necessarily adequate staffing levels or certifications to complete things that we need. So examples of that are engineering, legal services, an independent auditor, mowing, things like that we outsource. This section also includes things like utility expenses, vehicle and equipment repair and maintenance, and then insurance. Our next big section is supplies. So this covers things like road construction, operational supplies, fuel, winter sand, road salt, safety equipment, things along those lines, office supplies. Our debt section includes all principal and interest long-term financing payments. Our shorter term financing is found within the capital sections of the budget that it's applicable to, the department that it's applicable to. And then we have our capital section, which accounts for just over 26% of our operating budget. This includes short-term principal and interest debt payments, which are for like things like vehicles and equipment. Road construction, which is actually pretty much limited to the pavement that we're actually putting on the ground. It also includes reserve deposits for long-range capital planning and other infrastructure improvements. And then we...
So I'm trying to do the math. Trying to do the math. You said capital was 26% of the budget.
I think that's what it came out to, yeah.
So can you break down the other categories for me as a percent of the budget, like what you're calling supplies?
I don't have those handy, but I can certainly get them to you.
Because wasn't the personnel 77%?
It depends on how you look at it. It's either 51 or 77.
So you're
So I can get
26
those amounts.
Okay, yeah.
Then the next biggest factor that we have is revenues that come in to the town of Rockport that offset the amount of tax that we need to collect. So the first item that we have is state mandated reimbursements. So for general assistance that we offer, the state is mandated to reimburse us a percentage of that. We get state revenue sharing. When we actually go through the commitment process, there's a Betty reimbursement program, which is on the personal property tax side that the state reimburses us for exempting specific items. A homestead exemption reimbursement, which people that have lived in their home as a primary residence for more than a year are eligible for. That is a state program, so the state reimburses us a portion of that exemption. We have excise tax, which is our largest non-tax based revenue. So excise tax is on things like your motor vehicle registrations, campers, and things like that. Then we have billed services. So our EMS department has billed services. We have rentals at the Opera House and the harbor. And then we have other operational revenues at the harbor. Generally, we use some portion of the unassigned fund balance to reduce the overall obligation of the municipal budget. The unassigned fund balance is essentially just that. It's funds that are not assigned to a specific purpose. Generally, the purpose of keeping a higher unassigned fund balance is that you can avoid taking out a tax anticipation note, which in the long run saves the town money because we're not paying interest on borrowing in anticipation of taxes. Another source of revenue for us is our tax increment financing funds, or TIF funds. We currently have 3 TIFs in the town of Rockport. One is in the downtown area, one is out Route 90, and one is out Route 1. The one out Route 1 is expiring in the next few years, so then we'll be down to 2. But essentially what that does is it shifts some tax revenue for the purposes of development or infrastructure improvements in specific areas that the TIFs are designed for. And then we have use of reserve funds. We have several capital reserve funds that have been established to help offset large capital infrastructure costs that we know are coming up in the future.
Can you explain a little bit more how the unassigned fund balance, is that a formula we use every year to come up with that allocation, or is that a fund where there may be some left over from prior years and we carry it forward?
So it's the latter of the two. If we have over collections and revenues or we underspend in our expenses, basically the net of that is then rolled over into the unassigned fund balance, unless there's another purpose for that. But generally, it is just put to the unassigned fund balance, and then we use that money the following year to offset the obligation.
If I can just, so the unassigned fund balance is a very important piece of how the town operates, because it is effectively, it's our operating cash as we go through from period to period. We receive aside from car registrations, we're really receiving payments twice a year. That's it. So though, we have that October date and that April date, obviously we're paying for snow removal, we're paying for all these other services. The other thing that's important to remember is in state law, the county and the school payments have to receive priority over municipal needs. So we have to make sure that we are paying the school before we pay ourselves. So the cash flow is obviously it's important for any business, and it's important for the municipality, but it also allows you to avoid, if you have an ample fund balance, you have the ability to deal with emergencies as they occur. So for example, we had a situation a few years ago, we had a major rain event. We had the Robinson Drive washout that was just a calamitous situation. But we were able, it took us 3 years effectively, almost four, to get our reimbursement back from FEMA.
They still haven't sent it.
But we were able to keep that road open for 3 or 4 years, largely because we were operating out of our operating cash. We didn't borrow money to do it. We operated out of that fund. So because that unassigned fund balance was strong enough to withstand that, we were able to keep our expenses rolling and keep the operation of the 30 people who lived in that neighborhood in and out, even though it wasn't a budgeted item. So the fund balance it's a tricky situation because it forces you to, obviously you don't want to overtax and you don't want to underspend to the point that you're not being wise with your expenses. But you have to make sure that that fund balance is at a healthy portion so that you can just operate to keep your business operating. So, yeah.
So what's a healthy balance, John?
Well-
What percent?
25%. So general accounting,
25% of the total budget?
25% of your total budget. So that includes your county and school payments. So in terms of like the actual budget document itself, what you can find in it, the first section, if you get a printed one, there's dividers in it. I try to divide it for the PDF one that goes online, but sometimes depending on the version of Adobe that you have, it may or may not work. But in the first section, before you get to any of the dividers, I would say the most important part in that section is the town manager's budget letter. So what that letter is designed to do is to highlight changes or issues or projects that have been put into this budget or put off as a result of this budget. It's really addressing those like high level concerns all in one place, and then also giving you an idea of what is going to be shown in the budget document itself. Following that, we do post the budget schedule and the process in which the budget meetings happen and the purpose of those meetings. There's staffing level history, as well as if there's any proposed staffing changes, that information will show there too. There's an executive summary, so if you don't want to read the town manager's letter and you're only concerned about, say, the harbor department, you could go to the executive summary, look for the harbor department, and see what the key budget issues are for that department. We do include statistical information, so things like the consumer price index changes, changes to the median wage or age for Rockport specifically. We also include some county-wide statistical information, which we do use when we work on developing the budget. Our reserve accounts are all listed in this first section. So any established reserve account and the balance of that reserve account are shown in that section. We also show our county valuations and how we compare in terms of mill rate and overall valuation to other municipalities in this county. And then there's a 10-year budget history summary in that section as well. And the next section we get to is defined as the budget summary section. And basically this section is limited to summary charts and graphs for the proposed budget that is coming forward. It does have the entire budget summary. It shows revenues, it shows expenditures by detail, by expense line. So if you want to know across all departments how much we're spending in mowing or how much we're spending in fuel, you can go to that section and look up those lines and see exactly how much we're spending for that. There is 3 years worth of budget history that is actual expenditures for those 3 years. And then it also shows our current operating budget with the year-to-date expenditures of revenues through December. So when the 26-27 budget comes out, it will show the year-to-date expenditures through December of 2025. Then we get into the budget detail sections. So this is where you're going to see specific department requests and their backup for their department. In many cases, you'll also see statistical information for those departments. You'll see upcoming issues that they have or successful projects that they've done. It also has a summary page for each department that has their own statistical benchmarks that they try to meet, and just to give you an idea basically of what the department's doing. So in the general government and public assistance section, that covers administration, which is the select board, the town manager, town clerk, planning, finance, assessing, insurance, and public assistance are all encapsulated in that section. Then we get into public safety, which is police, fire, EMS. We have a department that's called other public safety services that covers like our hydrant rentals, our street lights, our traffic lights, costs associated with that. Then we have animal control, harbor, and emergency management agency. Then we get into public works. Public works, the bulk of their budget is wages and benefits and road construction. And then sanitation, that is our own costs for disposal of trash, as well as our assessment payment that we make to Midco Solid Waste. We have culture, recreation, buildings and grounds, and that section covers library, the Conservation Commission, parks, Opera House, the rec department, as well as buildings and grounds. Then we have debt, county, and all other. Debt is our long-term debt payments that we need to make. The county outlines our county assessments broken down into what is our assessment to them and then what is our 911 and dispatch fees. We have our school assessments, and those are broken out by the CSD, the MSAD, and then adult education. We have the cemeteries department, and then special assessments. And special assessments is really limited to the cost of sending out tax bills, and then things like revenue sharing and the state mandated reimbursements that we get from the state, like Betty reimbursement, homestead reimbursement, veterans reimbursement, things like that. So those are all shown in the special assessments. After that is the capital improvement plan. We do include this in the budget. The purpose of the
Can I just stop you for a second? When do we find out what our state revenue sharing amount is?
Not until they start issuing us payments, and then they update it based on collections of sales tax and things like that throughout the year. So we are not guaranteed a set amount basically at any time throughout the process of the year.
So when we're doing the budget in the spring, we have no idea.
They issue estimates, and they base those estimates on what they think tourism and stuff like that is gonna do. Generally, they do update those estimates throughout the year to reflect closer to the actuals.
But to give you a sense of when, so the last projections for this year came out on May 2nd. So thanks, very helpful. You know, it doesn't help any of us in this room get what we need, so.
The next section is the capital improvement section. This is included in the budget document. As we get into the CIP process, we'll talk more about how the CIP really links itself to the budget document. That will be presented and approved in October and November. It really should help drive capital expenditures that are in the budget, so that when you see capital expenditures show up in the budget, it's not a surprise that we're replacing the roof on the public safety building, for example. It's something that we've already talked about through the CIP process. And it really helps us plan for the future and help us utilize our reserve accounts appropriately, so that if we know that we have these large expenses coming up, instead of hitting taxpayers with it all at once, that we can incrementally finance it ourselves instead of paying for outside financing. The last section is financial policies and the glossary. This includes our financial driven policies, not all the policies throughout the town. It is not printed in the printed version anymore, but it is available. Those policies are available online in the PDF version. And then the glossary really just defines word or phrases in the document that might not be generally known, as any glossary would. Is this what?
No, this is you. Yeah, you
Okay.
get the schedule. You're lucky.
So our budget schedule really starts, this says October, but it really started in August when we sent out capital forms to department heads to really identify what their capital needs are for the next 5, 10 plus years. In October, that capital improvement plan will be published and shared with the select board and the budget committee, and we'll go through the items that are in there and talk about financing opportunities or ways that these projects might get done. In November, all the budget forms, November or sooner, all the budget forms go out to department heads to really start working through what their needs are for the next fiscal year. It's also their opportunity to update their goals for the next year, update their performance measures for the previous year. So those forms will go out in November, and then they're due back in December. January and February, January, February are really long months. John and I spend a lot of time with department heads going through their submissions, helping them work through things that maybe they wouldn't have thought about. And then after we go through that and department heads are comfortable with where their submissions are, John and I really sit down and go through and develop his budget to be presented to the select board and the budget committee by March 1st. In March, we spend a lot of time having joint meetings, workshops with the budget committee, the select board and town staff, and then the select board and budget committee also meet on their own through that process. Towards the end of March, the budget committee will have their own meeting to review the budget and make formal written recommendations to the select board. In those joint workshop meetings, it's really the time for the select board and the budget committee to ask questions of the department heads that are there, of their requests or changes to their departments or process improvements or anything like that. That's really appropriate for those workshop meetings. Once the budget committee has made their formal written recommendations to the select board then sits down and they develop and vote on their final proposed budget. So at this time, it's really when the select board is making their final changes to the budget for adoption. In April, there's a public hearing on the budget. So this is the opportunity that the public has to come in and ask questions about the budget, or if they have concerns or anything like that. That's their opportunity. Obviously, all of our meetings are open to the public, so they can come at any point, but there is a formal public hearing on the budget in April. And then in June, the registered voters of Rockport vote on the proposed budget by secret ballot that the select board has approved.
John? Yeah.
So, Megan, somewhere in between April and June, there's a hard date where the budget needs to be finalized in order for early voting, or, we've got to have it ready for the town warrant. What's that date?
By the public hearing date.
By the public hearing date.
I think it's the second week in April that our budget has to be done in order for our ballots to be here in time for absentee
Right.
voting.
So,
That second Monday of April is
Yep.
Yeah.
so my question is, if at the public hearing we find that there's a legitimate concern or a concern we want to respond to and adjust the budget,
You still have time, because at that April, following your public hearing on the budget in April, you will then set your final warrant for the June election. So if there were changes that you wanted to make to the budget as a result of the public hearing, you could do so before you approve the written warrant articles.
but you really only have, practically speaking, like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
No,
It's the night of.
it happens same night.
Yeah. So I'll try to clarify a little bit. So effectively, that's your last moment to where you can actually have a ballot created is that last week. So the select board meetings are generally on the second Monday of every month. And the way that the calendar works out just so to ensure that you have enough time for absentee ballots and so forth, really you have to have approved the warrant, which eventually is what becomes the ballot, that same week. So if you were to, let's say, take feedback on a public hearing or receive any sort of feedback of any type and had to go back to work on it, you would have to come back that week with another meeting to approve the warrant to then have a ballot. So it's really at that point, and I'm not saying at that point, commentary from that point on is really about vote yes, vote no. Vote, I like this, I don't like this, I think we should do this versus that. It's less something that could be part of the process. The time for really being part of the process is really February, March, and really late March, early April, to where the budget committee, the select board are hearing and discussing. Once we're getting to that point where you have to effectively approve the warrant to put that forward, it's almost impossible to make changes that late a date.
So at any of those earlier meetings, is there an opportunity for the public to comment and/or, certainly they can observe and sit in on any of those meetings, but is there an opportunity for them to comment?
They're more designed as workshops, so they're open to any, there's no formal process in terms of when commentary can or cannot happen.
I think the challenge, and if that was a goal or a strategy, I think there's a way to sort of build that in, maybe. I think the challenge here is, inevitably when you have 3 nights or 4 nights for the review meetings of 14 people sitting around a table looking at every line and every budget, we usually use the full extent of those nights to where they're quite long. So you would have to probably add meetings into the calendar, which can be a challenge anyway. Not saying it's not valuable, but just saying in terms of how it seems to work. The budget committee meeting itself in the recent history has been quite long because it's a start from square one and go through the whole effort. And then the select board meeting has been sort of an encapsulation of the select board's work, but then also taking the work that the budget committee had completed and reviewing that on top of it. So that's not to say that there isn't a role for public engagement in this in any way. I think it's just there's a lot of work to go through this document that the 14 people who are entrusted with making those decisions, there hasn't been a lot of room, I think, that they've been able to carve into it. Doesn't mean it couldn't exist, but just hasn't, you know.
And I think we just haven't had anybody show up who wanted to talk about anything on the budget, so I think we would always make room if we did have some more interest in that.
Yeah. Am I up next? So actually, that's great segue, John and Denise. So who are the stakeholders? Because that's, there's a role for everyone in this process. And so the first, just to start at the top of the group here, is the taxpayers, right? They are the voters. They are the ones who ultimately have final say over everything that happens, good, bad, and indifferent. It's their votes. So all 100%, well, 93% directly, Rockport voters decide what taxes they're going to pay, because we vote on a school board, or we vote on the school budget at the referendum, and we vote on a municipal budget every June. So we have direct say over that. Now, there's indirect say on the 7% that is part of the county budget, but that's another argument for another time. But that group is really there to figure out how they want to support municipal operations that run the gamut. And again, their say is the final. The next group is the select board. So there to reflect the best interests of the town, whatever that may be, whatever those goals may reflect, long-term, short-term, establish policy decisions, whether within the document or follow policies that are previously established that are integrated within. So, for example, let's say there was a personnel policy, and this is how we're going to interact with how personnel benefits are handled. The select board may do that work in December, but the actual funding of that comes through the budget document. So the policy's already set. Now the board has to fund that policy, or however they wish to go. They are there to ensure that the service levels are maintained at a level that's desired by the majority. So while they're not directly overseeing the operations of the town, they're there to make sure that everything is operating the way it should. That the steamship is going in the right direction. It's not going this way. It's going where the majority of the community wants it to see. The budget committee's role. Their role is defined within our charter. They make formal recommendations to the select board for the assistance and development of the budget. It's very clearly defined level. They are there to represent the wishes of the taxpayers, but they're there to bring their expertise, their insight, and to engage in this sort of meaningful, respectful conversations about budgets and service levels, and bring concerns forward through the budget process. They're there to introduce that aspect into the budget. Again, there is a charter that the town has adopted. It talks about how that interplay works. Budget committees work differently in a number of different communities across the state. Some communities have appointed budget committees. Some have elected budget committees. Some have finance committees. It can run the gamut. The point, I think, here is to try to make sure that everyone has the information they need and can engage in a thoughtful conversation about what's best for Rockport. So budget committee's role in that is important. My role as a town manager is to help facilitate the communication, both with the select board, the budget committee, department heads, to ensure that employees, that all of our staff are engaged in this process. They're hearing the policy goals that are being outlined from and approved by the select board. They're hearing the concerns or questions or triumphs that have been raised by the budget committee. And to really ensure that that our staff, while they're working for the town and working for all of us, that they're also engaged with understanding the peaks and valleys that go with every budget process, and they understand where we stand and where we're going. Some are residents, some are not, but understanding where they fit in the process is important. I also have the role of enacting the policies that the select board adopts, the goals that the select board adopts, and of course those that are going through the budget. So I have to sort of bring all of that back home and ensure that it happens. And then we have the department heads. The department heads, their job is really, they have to provide reasonable budgets that obviously get looked at by myself, and Megan's part of that process. And they're hearing that what's going on in town, and make sure those budgets reflect what it takes to operate their department effectively and efficiently. They look not only short term, not just on what budget to budget is, but they're looking at the long-term goals as well. And that's for their department. My job is to then stitch all those departments together so that way there's some sort of cohesive understanding. Everyone has a different role in this process, and everyone, as long as everyone's overall mission, we may have come from different places on this, pentagon of different stakeholders, but with the understanding in mind, we're trying to do what's best for the town of Rockport, and that can mean different things to different people and different experiences, and that's okay. But there is this is an important process because it can be very far-ranging and far-reaching, and so ensuring that everyone understands what's at play and understands the importance and the gravity of what we do, hopefully provides us with a good result in the end. So that's largely our 101 of how the budget works and how it's operated. We certainly appreciate everyone coming in, all handful of you here today. Certainly glad to answer any questions we get through and wrap it up. So, John's first on the mic.
So I wanted to go back, just not to call anything out other than it's the process and the experience, I think, for the average taxpayer is that there's not really many opportunities, at least in the past, to have input on this. But in fact, there really is, because if you attend all the meetings or sit at home and listen to all the meetings, we're discussing all of these issues line by line by line over many hours.
Right.
So I just want to kind of boldface that a little bit, that if you're watching the meetings and you have a concern, let somebody know. Speak up. Find a select board member. Well, I don't want to send them to
No, send them
staff.
my way. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
But
I can take it.
that's the time to say something, because by the time it's on the town warrant,
Yeah.
it's really just one number. It's taxes and it's expenses and revenue, and the school budget is kind of even a little bit worse, and so that's a whole other issue. But anyway, you really can't do much other than give it yes or no once it's on the warrant.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's that things are done at that point. Okay.
Yeah, well said. I think that there's, the other thing I want to say is that the budget process never really ends. and I said this at the initial budget committee meeting, but what ends up happening is you go through these budget review meetings where we look at every budget, and we have and every year we have, of the 14, on average, we've had 5 new members every single year that I've been here. So the 4 years I've been here, I think we've had on average 5 new people introduced into the budget process every year. So in one way, that's good because you're getting new ideas and new thoughts. On the other hand, that means a third of the group is changing over. And in 2 years, 2/3 of the group is changing over, which then means what sounded like a great idea 2 years ago could be a terrible idea 2 years later. So it's very difficult for someone in my shoes or Megan's shoes to somewhat build off those things. So the reason why I mention that is not because, oh, we should have no term limits and everyone should last forever. No, but what I mean by that is we have a process where everyone's listening. Department heads are listening, town manager's listening, staff is listening, and the conversations that are had linger. So the issues that are raised, so the select board, for example, there was, I think, a list of 13, 14 items that were raised through the budget process last year. And I can tell you the number of times, the amount of hours that have been spent just talking, department head to department head, staff to staff, in the period since last March of those varied ideas has been innumerable. So the impact of those conversations is immense, and it does lead to change. Now, does the change happen immediately? Probably not. We're like an aircraft carrier. We don't turn very fast, but we are listening, and staff listens, the board listens, the budget committee listens. We had an individual who was on the budget committee, ran for the select board, served a full term of 3 years, and had very strong opinions about the type of ground cover we should have in cemeteries. And we took a number of different approaches to have that conversation over 3 years of that individual's tenure on the board. And ultimately decided not to make the change. But what's important about it is that the ideas and the voice that one person can have is really important. And so whether it's one person raising something to you, John, or to Michael or Kim or Michelle or Denise or Craig or anybody, it can have real impact. And so I just say, people should reach out. People should talk with all of you, talk with me, let people know how they're feeling, what's happening. But there's the other side of this. There's an inertia to how town government works. We have to arrest the bad guys when bad things happen. We have to put out the fires when the fires happen. So we can't shut down, and we can't treat this like a corporation, because we have to deliver services every day, 24/7, whether we want to or we don't want to. So that's a very different dynamic than what you see in some businesses or many businesses. It's a unique, public sector is a unique animal in and of itself. So hopefully, as we go through this and we go through new people and new conversations, it does evolve over time. But in the time that you've been on, John, the year, 4 months, for whatever it is, it is a slow evolution of things, but it does happen. And I think that for those who've been involved for a while, you can see that happen. So we'll see as we go through this budget process and how things change from what was described and discussed last spring. But judging from what the select board has said and what some of the goals have been, I think there's going to be real change. You're already seeing it. This process is different than it was last year, and hopefully our residents are feeling that and understanding it. And hopefully they learned something from this presentation tonight about how we do things and how our tax bill comes to be.
That was very well said, John.
Oh, thanks.
And I want to commend the staff too on moving the schedule forward to accommodate some of the concerns that have been expressed. The other thing, I guess it's worth pausing a bit on the point of, if somebody comes to you and say, hey, I want to give you a lot of extra this or a lot of extra that.
Yeah.
It's very easy to say, well, yeah, I'm gonna vote for that. That sounds really great.
Yeah.
And then comes the price tag.
Yeah.
And you could be having something on the ballot one year, and the price, to start to pay for that added service or added feature or whatever it is,
Yeah.
maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and it may be in the budget, impacting the budget for many years to come, actually.
Right.
So, and I think the budget book that we put together is extremely well done, and there's pieces of it that people can look at, say the capital improvement plan. And when we put a schedule in there to add whatever capital improvements we want in the town, people should bear that in mind, that when you say yes to that, then there's a ripple effect. And so it's not, we can't go year over year, year to year and say, well, we're just not going to do that.
Right.
Because it may be something that was approved by voters 2, 3 years earlier. So,
And I think this last budget was example number one of exactly that issue, where a number of different decisions, not only select board decisions, largely not select board decisions made by all of us as residents that we voted for at the ballot box. Not all of us voted for them, or whatever it might be, but the decision of the town was in a number of cases, and as a result, our budget was up last year. It felt the weight of that. Now, that doesn't happen every year, thank goodness. We don't build new fire stations every year. We don't, start new departments every year. And if I had the last year to go over again, we would never do that again if I could help it. But that has had an outsized influence on the last year's budget process. I don't think we're going to see that. The other thing that should be mentioned, though, is the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation over the last 5 years is tremendous. It's hit all of us. It's hit our pocketbooks. It's hit our price of meat. It's hit our price of commodities, of what we take to operate. And that's hurt us across all of us, personally, professionally, whatever it might be. So there are different aspects that are coming into the play that we have to think about. But we're very serious. My message to all the department heads, they're sick of probably hearing it, but that we have to be as thin as we can be. The budget committee's met. They've set a 1%. I don't know if I'm supposed to call it a goal, but it's a target. Maybe, I don't know if that. I won't put you on the spot, Craig, to answer for the whole committee, but let's just say a target point for. Obviously, and I think regardless of that point, that's the message that the board has. We want to be returning to numbers that are a lot more like the numbers that we've seen historically, and I think that's exactly the message that we're giving across.
So to build on that a little bit, John, I think I just want to also pause on the notion of the select board form of government that we have here in the town, and just correct any mistaken notions that the select board can go ahead and approve major investments, major expenses. Every major expense, capital improvement, everything, a bond, all, any of those big ticket items, build the West Rockport Fire Station, that has to go before voters.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
The select board does not have the authority to approve that. So again, when you go to that ballot box and when you look at that town warrant, be aware of what you're voting for and own it.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Now, there are many residents who are new to Rockport, who are new to maybe the town manager form of government, town manager, select board, town meeting form of government. To be clear, while the select board certainly has authority and policy setting and hiring me, and thus then I hire staff on our behalf, you are not a town council. And a town council has that authority to create ordinances, approve budgets, bond, wide-ranging authority. That's not what we have in Rockport. We still have a select board, town meeting form of government, which means all of us as residents has the same say. And that has worked well for Rockport over time. There are some towns who have moved away from it, who need to move faster or whatever it might be. But that's not where we are right now, and our charter is very clear on who has the authority and who doesn't. So I think that's well said. Absolutely. Yep. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for putting this together.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We have a number of folks watching. We're going to try to put this up on YouTube so people can maybe watch from home. I know we have a number of maybe budget committee members who couldn't be here, who wish to be here. But also, I think we're hopeful that residents can watch this and maybe have a sense of how does this work? Again, what individual decisions that get made through this process, that's not what this today is about. It's really about how does it work? And it's a long-standing process. Can it improve? Sure. We're open to all of that, and as I think the board and the budget committee has seen. But thank you, everybody, and have a good night.